The Whisperwood Chronicles. Chapter 1. Ash and Amber, Expanded Edition. The Forge of Oakhaven burned long into the night. Its glow pulsed through the shutter slats of the warden's hall, gilding the rain that whispered against the windows. Every hammer strike rang like the slow heartbeat of the city itself, echoing through corridors built from the bones of older wars. Within the forge chamber, Astrid stood bare-armed before the anvil, her braids singed with sparks. The air smelled of iron, coal, and faint lavender from the oil the apprentices used to keep their lungs from seizing. Above her workbench hung the trophies of a lifetime, the horned skull of a forest worm, blackened and cracked, a pair of rust-eaten Duergar greaves, a broken goblin standard whose sigil had long since flaked away. Between them, lanterns swung on iron chains, each etched with a protective rune that glimmered as she struck. On the wall opposite, banners hung in layered rows, some bright, most tattered. The oldest bore the mark of Oakhaven's founding clans, a silver badger on black cloth, surrounded by curling script in a tongue almost forgotten. Others displayed victories since the siege of Greycliff, the quelling of the Hollow March, the night of the Green Fires. Dust motes drifted like snow in the amber light. When Kyle, her steward, entered, his boots made no sound on the flagstones. He paused beside a rack of weaponry, halberds, swords, hunting bows, even a long spear made from the spine of something serpentine. "You keep your trophies close," he said once long ago. She had answered, "They remind the walls who they protect." Tonight, those same trophies seemed to listen. "Warden," Kyle began quietly, water dripping from his cloak. "The elders convened at dusk. There's news from the forest." Astrid did not look up from the blade she was tempering. "The Whisperwood again." "Aye, the miners at Grey Cliff saw green fire under the roots," and he hesitated, unfolding a parchment still damp from the rain. "3 children from the northern farms, missing." The hammer stopped. The forge's hiss filled the silence. Astrid lifted her eyes, grey and sharp as freshly honed steel. "Who brought the word?" "A traveller, said the lights moved like lanterns. Elder Stonehand asks that we contain it quietly." Astrid quenched the blade, steam curling around her like breath. "Send for Alucard," Kyle frowned. "The ranger?" "He doesn't answer easily." "He will. He owes me a favor." At dawn the next day, the gates of Oakhaven creaked open to a wall of fog. A lone figure emerged, cloak sodden, boughs slung across his back. Alucard walked with the patience of one who counted heartbeats instead of miles. Oakhaven itself stirred awake behind him, smoke curling from smithies, guards changing shifts along parapets adorned with hanging charms of bone and copper meant to ward off forest spirits. The city's walls were carved from the mountain's flank, studded with alcoves holding votive candles that guttered in the wind. Astrid waited in the courtyard before the hall. The rain had stopped, leaving the stones slick and mirror bright. "You came faster than I expected," she said. "The forest doesn't wait," Alucard answered. His voice carried gravel and exhaustion. "What's stirring this time?" "Green light, missing children, the same song as before." He glanced toward the tree line visible beyond the walls, dark, motionless, endless. "Then the crystals weren't all gone?" "You broke 3, she reminded him. "Aye, but something under them lived." Their silence was broken only by the creak of banners in the damp wind. A servant lit the braziers along the hall, their smoke mingling with the smell of wet earth and iron. Kyle approached with 2 newcomers. The first was a wall of muscle in charred plate, Brotard, eyes burning like embers under his hood. His armor bore etchings of infernal script, pulsing faintly red when the light caught it. "You called for strength," he said, voice a low forge rumble. "I bring it." Behind him sauntered Gunnar, lean, violet-haired, his cloak patched in mismatched colors and covered in ink stains. A charm of teeth and tiny bottles clinked at his belt. "Elder Stonehand sent me," he said. "Said the woods are whispering again. I like a good conversation." Brotard's glare could have felled a boar. "Mockery is no armor." "No, but it's lighter to carry," Gunnar replied with a grin. Astrid's tone sliced through the tension. "Enough. You're here because I need answers." The Whisperwood stirs again. Alucard knows its paths. Brotard knows the cult's scent. "Gunnar," she studied him. "You hear what others can't. That may help." "It usually gets me nearly killed," Gunnar said. "But sure, let's call it helpful." They gathered in the great hall, its vaulted ceiling blackened with soot from decades of torch smoke. Shields of fallen captains lined the walls, each bearing dents left unpolished. out of respect. Above the dais hung the banner of the badger, edges frayed, its silver threads dulled by time. The long meeting table was scarred with old knife marks and stained with wine, a veteran of 1,000 councils. Astrid spread a parchment map across it. Wax dripped from tall candles shaped like tree roots, their light dancing over the inked valleys. "Here," she said, tracing a circle near the forest's northern edge. "The miners saw the light. If the children are alive, they're there. If not," she paused, "we find what took them." Brotard cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing off the stone, "and burn it." "We'll try subtlety first," Alucard said dryly. "Subtlety is for cowards," Brotard answered. "And flames are for fools who run out of patience," Gunnar murmured, plucking at a candle wick. "Both of you seem well supplied." Astrid slammed her palm on the table. The candles quivered. "Enough! We move as one. No egos, no martyrs." Silence settled like dust after a storm. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley, muffled by the thick walls. "At nightfall," Astrid said, "the Whisperwood hides its truths in darkness. Let's see if we can teach it fear." By dusk, the city had folded into shadow. Torches burned in the battlements, reflecting off the wet cobbles. Villagers watched from doorways as the four approached the northern gate. An unlikely procession. The warden with her forge-born sword, the silent ranger, the laughing warlock, and the iron priest with eyes of flame. Morty, Astrid's black warhorse, pawed the ground, its mane braided with silver charms. Alucard checked his bowstring one last time. Gunnar murmured a spell that made the torches dim. Brotard said nothing, but the ground seemed to thrum with each step he took. As the gate rose, the rain returned in thin, whispering sheets. The world beyond was all fog and trees and the slow heartbeat of unseen thunder. Astrid turned once, looking back at the stronghold. The forge's glow flickered behind the shuttered windows, painting the hall's trophies in gold and red. The skulls, the banners, the blades of past wars. They gleamed like memories unwilling to die. "If we do not return," she said quietly, "Oakhaven must endure." "You always plan for failure?" Gunnar asked. "I plan for everything," she replied. "Failure just keeps the best schedule." Even Brotard's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Alucard nodded toward the woods. "Then let's keep her waiting." The forest swallowed them whole. They crossed the threshold. And in the distance, carried faint on the rain, came the first whisper. Welcome back. Chapter 2. The Whispering Woods. The Whisperwood was older than any map. It began as a line of shadow at the horizon, but as the four approached, it rose into a wall of living dusk. Trees the size of towers loomed over the path, their roots tangled into knotted ridges. Between them, fog drifted low and thick, so dense that torches only painted shallow circles of light. The ground was soft with centuries of rot. Each step released the faint scent of wet leaves, decay, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. The forest hummed with life, yet no creature made a sound, no bird call, no insects. Only the steady drip of rain from canopy to undergrowth, and the occasional sigh of branches brushing one another like restless sleepers. Alucard led, as always, moving in silence. His boots barely disturbed the carpet of moss. Every so often he paused, pressing a hand to the bark of a nearby trunk, feeling for vibrations. The trees here were not still, they listened. Behind him, Astrid's armor whispered faintly with each motion. The forge-tempered steel caught the occasional gleam of her torchlight. She carried her helm beneath her arm, face uncovered to read the forest's shifting moods. Brotard came third, a shape of iron and shadow. The faint glow of the infernal runes on his gauntlets cast red halos on the wet bark. The air seemed to grow heavier around him, as if the forest itself leaned back from his presence. Gunnar trailed last, cloak sweeping through ferns and dew. His fingers flicked idly, tracing unseen sigils in the air as he murmured to himself, sometimes words, sometimes laughter that had no clear reason. "You hum again," Alucard said without looking back. "Humming keeps ghosts polite," Gunnar replied. "Or bored, I never remember which." Brotard grunted. "Keep your breath, the trees here." "Then let them eavesdrop," Gunnar said. "Might learn something." Astrid raised her hand for silence. "Enough! Listen." The party stopped. The forest breathed, branches creaking, mist shifting, and then came the faintest sound, a whisper like cloth dragged over stone. It wasn't wind, it wasn't movement, it was speech. "Why do you return?" Gunnar's smile faded. "Ah, that's new." The path opened into a glade shaped like a bowl, ringed by trees whose bark had split open into weeping seams of glowing sap. The light from within them was pale green, too bright to be natural, too sickly to be beautiful. The air smelled of ozone and rot. Puddles reflected the light like shards of broken glass. In the glade's heart stood a stone, weathered, fissured, half swallowed by roots. Its crack glowed from within with the same eerie light. The crystal! There! Astrid whispered. Alucard crouched at the edge of the glade. Guardians, he said, scanning the ground. Tracks, not animals, something heavier, drags instead of walks. Brotard smiled faintly. Then it waits for us. Astrid lifted her torch higher. Or watches. The whisper came again, closer this time. The green light pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat. From the puddles around the stone, shapes began to rise. They came slowly, soundlessly, slimes dark and half-transparent, their surfaces rippling with hints of swallowed bone and metal. Faces drifted briefly within them before melting away again. By the forge, Astrid murmured. How many souls has this thing eaten? Too many to count, Alucard said, already drawing his bow. Stay behind me. The first slime lunged, its form collapsing forward like a wave. Alucard's arrow hissed through the mist, striking dead center. The creature recoiled, then burst in a spray of acid that hissed across the stones. The smell of burning moss filled the air. Another rose behind Brotard. It struck his shoulder with a wet slap, clinging and smoking against his armor. He bellowed, the runes along his arms flaring like live coals. Begone! His gauntlet ignited, searing through the mass. The slime shrieked, a sound like boiling flesh, and dissolved into steam. Gunnar stepped forward, unbothered, the violet glow of his magic reflecting in his eyes. You lot never learn when to stay in one piece. He flicked his wrist. The air cracked with thunder. An eldritch blast lanced outward, slicing through another slime and vaporizing it in a spiral of violet mist. Astrid's torch guttered. She drew her sword, broad-bladed, marked with forged sigils, and swung through the last slime, its form collapsing in two as molten sap splattered her boots. The glade fell silent again, except for the sound of their breathing. Efficient, she said, cleaning her blade on a rag. But too easy. Alucard approached the crystal, its glow flickering as he neared. They were guards, not predators. Gunnar crouched beside him, peering into the crack. Inside the stone, something moved, slow and rhythmic, as if breathing. And that, he said softly, is the cage. Astrid knelt beside the crystal, resting her gauntlet on its surface. It was warm, like flesh, and pulsed beneath her touch. A wound, she murmured. Then close it, Brotard said. No, Alucard replied. Cauterize it. He drew the same battered pickaxe he'd used months before. The metal was blackened from old use, the handle wrapped in strips of cloth dark with dried blood. He took a breath, adjusted his stance, and swung. The impact split the air. Light burst from the crack like fire through paper, and for a heartbeat everything went silent, utterly silent. Then came the scream. It wasn't sound, it was memory, but the forest screamed through their bones, visions tore through them, hands clawing at earth, faces consumed by light, voices chanting in the depths below. Alucard staggered back, eyes wide. It's connected, he gasped, to something deeper, the cult, the Duergar. The crystal shattered, the pieces hissed, melting into the soil like venom. The light dimmed, only the faint echo of the whispers remained. Beneath the roots, we wake again. Astrid rose slowly, torchlight catching the soot that now streaked her cheek. A wound sealed, she said. A warning sent, Gunnar countered. They know we're here now. Brotard looked toward the shadows between the trees. Let them. I'll answer. Alucard turned his gaze north, where the forest's mist gathered thickest. The cult's crypt lies that way. The miners' tunnels connect to it. Astrid nodded. Then that's our next step. We find the crypt. We find the source. And if it's worse than this? Gunnar asked. She gave him a small, hard smile. Then the forest won't be the only thing whispering tonight. They left the glade before dawn, their torchlight dwindling to embers in the fog. The trees leaned closer now, their branches dripping with condensation that shimmered faintly green. Behind them, the broken crystal still pulsed weakly, a dying heartbeat buried in moss. As the forest reclaimed the silence, a single voice rose faintly through the mist. They cut the roots. They come for the heart. The Whisperwood exhaled, and far beneath their feet the mountains stirred in answer. Chapter 3. The Crypt and the Blight. The mouth of the crypt yawned from the ravine like the wound of a dead god. It was vast and uneven, carved into the cliffside by hands that once believed they could tame what lived beneath. Moss draped its arch like the tattered remnants of a shroud. The air that issued forth was colder than winter. Not the clean cold of snow, but the dried chill of a tomb that had forgotten sunlight. Mist gathered around the entrance, refusing to move, even as wind swept the ravine. The smell was unmistakable: earth, rot, and something mineral, like blood on a forged stone. Astrid stood before the opening, torch raised. The firelight licked across the worn carvings framing the entrance, dwarven work, unmistakable, straight lines, square runes, edges chipped by centuries. Yet woven through them were newer sigils, curving alien marks painted in green resin that pulsed faintly in the dark. Duergar craft, Alucard murmured. But these marks, they aren't theirs. No, Astrid said. The cult overwrote them. Gunnar crouched beside one of the symbols, tracing it with a gloved finger. It's not language, it's hunger with grammar, Brotard snorted. Then let's starve it. He stepped forward, the weight of his armor echoing like distant thunder. Astrid followed, then Alucard, silent as breath. Gunnar lingered a moment, running a hand along the cold stone. You feel that? He murmured to no one. It's listening. The tunnel beyond was narrow at first, chiseled from the rock and reinforced with old timbers slick with age. Rusted lanterns hung from hooks, most long extinguished. The deeper they went, the more the air thickened, not just stale but stagnant, as though the earth itself resented their trespass. Their torches hissed in the damp. The walls glimmered faintly where green crystal veins ran like buried lightning, threading through cracks in the stone. When Astrid brushed one with her glove, a spark jumped to her palm. She snatched her hand back, eyes narrowing. It's alive, she said quietly. Everything here is, Gunnar murmured. They continued downward. The tunnel widened into corridors lined with niches filled by shapes that might once have been statues. But the carvings were too human, too imperfect, their faces worn away as if erased by hands from the inside. Offerings littered the ground, rusted cups, melted candles, and bones arranged in circles, each filled with green wax that still burned, though no flame touched it. The cult reclaims old Duergar tombs, Alucard said. Why dig new graves when you can rent old ones? Practical blasphemy, Gunnar replied. A distant sound carried through the dark, rhythmic chanting, faint but growing. The words were unintelligible, more vibration than voice. Brotard's stride quickened. We're close, he said. The air tastes like prayer. The corridor ended in a black arch of cracked marble. Beyond it lay a cathedral-sized chamber, hewn from the mountain's heart. Stone pillars carved into the shapes of kneeling figures held up the ceiling. Each one wore a different expression: agony, devotion, ecstasy. Melted wax cascaded down their backs in rivers of grey, pooling at their bases. The smell of burning tallow and decay hung heavy. At the center stood an altar of obsidian, upon which a man was bound, his wrists tied with vines that pulsed faintly green. His eyes darted wildly beneath a gag. 11 cultists encircled him, their robes of stitched hide glistening in the flickering light. Above them hovered a sphere of light, the color of old bruises, green fading into violet, alive with faces that formed and vanished in its depths. The chanting swelled. Each phrase drove another pulse of light through the orb. The bound man began to tremble violently. Master Fenwick, Gunnar breathed. The merchant. Alive, Astrid said. Barely. Brotard cracked his knuckles, eyes aflame. Then we intervene. Subtlety, Alucard warned. Brotard smiled without humor. You've had your turn. The first arrow loosed before the cult even knew they were seen. It struck a hooded throat. The chant broke on a wet gurgle. In the same instant, Gunnar's hand flashed. A crack of violet energy struck another cultist, hurling him across the altar in a shower of embers. Brotard charged into the fray, the runes on his gauntlets flaring like twin suns. His first blow shattered a man's jaw. His second caved in a ribcage. Each impact sent ripples of red light through the floor, answering the orbs pulsing in violent rhythm. Blood for balance! He roared. Astrid was a storm behind him, every strike a hymn of the forge. Her blade cleaved through robes and bone alike, her movements deliberate, brutal, and efficient. Sparks danced along the edge as it met the enchanted stone of the altar. The orb pulsed faster, feeding on the chaos. Its surface split open like a pupil dilating, and the chamber filled with a voice that spoke directly into their bones. Why do you fight your own reflection? The remaining cultists froze mid-motion, their bodies convulsing as the orb's light swallowed them. They fused together into a single towering silhouette of shifting faces and clawed hands. The herald of the blight rose nearly to the ceiling, its form semi-transparent, limbs too many and constantly rearranging. Its eyes were holes, spilling green radiance that stained the stone beneath. When it moved, the sound was like 1,000 whispers tearing through silk. Gunnar stumbled back. By every dead god, it's wearing them. Astrid planted her feet. Then we strip it bare. The herald lashed out, a tendril of shadow whipping across the chamber. Alucard dove aside, rolling into a kneel and firing 3 arrows in quick succession. They pierced through the creature's torso and emerged from the far wall, leaving trails of light that burned briefly before fading. Brotard roared, meeting the tendril head-on, his gauntlets locked with it, and the contact sent a shockwave through the room. "You call yourself holy?" he snarled. "Let's see you pray with your teeth broken." He tore the tendril free, hurling it into the altar. The orb above it flickered. Gunnar raised both hands, violet lightning crackling between them. "Let's make it blink!" His blast struck the orb dead center. The air rippled, the light fractured. The herald screamed, not from its mouth, but from every face within it. Astrid seized the moment, leaping forward and driving her sword into the creature's chest. The blade met resistance like cutting through tar. "Back to the roots!" she hissed, twisting the blade. The orb cracked. The scream that followed shook the pillars, raining dust from the ceiling. The herald convulsed, shattering into ash and smoke. The orb fell, striking the altar with a dull thud, splitting open to reveal a swirling void within, not empty, but watching. "You are seen," the void whispered, "and what sees remembers." Then it winked out, leaving only the dying glow of their torches. Master Fennec coughed weakly as Astrid cut his bonds. His face was pale, his breath shallow. "You're safe now," she said gently. "Safe?" he rasped. "You don't understand. That wasn't their god. It was their messenger." The heart still beats below. The torches flickered. Somewhere deeper in the catacombs, a slow, steady thump answered him, low, distant, like a mountain exhaling. Alucard's eyes met Astrid's. "We've only silenced the choir," Brotard spat on the floor. "Then we'll burn the cathedral." Gunnar leaned against a shattered pillar, wiping blood from his mouth. "We'll need more than fire if it truly has a heart." Astrid rose, wiping her blade clean. "Then we'll find it, and forge a new one in its place." They left the crypt as dawn bled into the valley. The ravine's mist turned gold where sunlight touched it, but within the cave, the shadows clung stubbornly. When they reached the surface, the forest greeted them with silence. Even the wind dared not pass through the trees. Behind them in the dark, a heartbeat continued, faint, patient, thump, thump. The blight was not gone, it was waiting. Chapter 4. Children of the Mist, Expanded Edition. Dawn came weak and colorless. The sky above Oakhaven was a sheet of dull pewter, and the forest below it breathed pale mist from its wounds. Where the Whisperwood's glade had once glowed with toxic light, now there lingered a cold hush, the silence of something that had screamed too loudly and torn its own voice apart. Astrid led the party north, along an overgrown trail once used by loggers, her armor dulled with soot and sap. Alucard walked ahead, eyes scanning the fog for motion. His hand never left the hilt of his knife. Gunnar trailed close behind, muttering words under his breath that smelled faintly of ozone and candle wax. Brotard, last, carried the broken haft of a cultist's banner as a torch, its head wrapped in oil-soaked rags that hissed as they burned. "And the villagers said the children vanished near the hollow vale," Astrid said quietly. "They were playing in the fog when it took them." "Fog doesn't take," Alucard replied. "It hides what does." The path narrowed, lined with skeletal trees whose bark bore strange markings. Handprints pressed deep into the wood, blackened as if burned. The air grew thick, and the mist began to swirl with deliberate patterns, curling in slow spirals that never dispersed. Gunnar raised his hand, eyes narrowing. "This isn't weather. It's memory." They reached a clearing that had once been a farmstead. What remained was little more than a husk. The barn collapsed, the fields drowned under a mat of pale fungus. The farmhouse stood crooked, one corner sunk into the earth, its roof sagging like a broken wing, yet faint light flickered behind its shattered windows. Astrid motioned for silence. Alucard crept ahead, crouching beneath the eaves. Through a hole in the wall he saw movement, not quick but rhythmic, like someone rocking slowly in a chair. A low hum drifted out, tuneless and childlike. He motioned to the others. They entered as one. The smell hit them first, mildew, smoke, and something sweet and spoiled. The interior was cluttered with relics of domestic life, a cradle overturned and empty, a child's toy sword propped against the hearth, a table covered in melted candles and mold. The walls were lined with crude drawings scrawled in charcoal, stick figures holding hands, surrounded by circles of spiraling lines. Every figure's eyes were wide black pits. In the center of the room sat a figure wrapped in shawls, humming to the dark. As Astrid stepped forward, the figure turned. It was a woman. or what had been one. Her skin was pale and cracked like old parchment, her eyes glazed with a faint green light. In her lap lay a bundle wrapped in blankets. "Hush," the woman whispered, voice quivering. "You'll wake them." "Who?" Astrid asked softly. The woman smiled, a terrible, brittle smile. "The children. They play in the mist now." Gunnar circled slowly, studying her. "She's not possessed," he murmured. "She's anchored." Something used her grief as a door. Brotard raised his hand, flame flickering in his palm. "Then we close it." "No," Astrid said sharply. "Not yet." Alucard knelt beside the cradle. Inside lay nothing but damp cloth and 3 small, perfect handprints pressed into the wood, glowing faintly. "They're close," he whispered. Outside, the fog thickened until the world beyond the doorway vanished. The air turned heavy and wet, carrying a faint echo of children's laughter, far away, overlapping, distorted by the mist. "Astrid," Gunnar said, stepping toward the window. "It's forming." The mist was no longer drifting. It was assembling. Faces appeared in it, vague, soft, childish, dozens of them. They turned toward the farmhouse as one. The woman began to hum again, louder now. The green light behind her eyes flared, and the floorboards trembled beneath their feet. Brotard's voice rumbled like thunder. "It's feeding through her." "Can you stop it?" Astrid asked. "With fire." "Do it!" Brotard thrust his burning fist into the air, shouting a word that cracked the air like a breaking branch. A ring of red fire erupted around the farmhouse, forcing the mist back with a hiss like boiling water. The faces in the fog screamed, not in pain but in protest, and the woman shrieked, clinging to the bundle in her arms. "You'll kill them!" Astrid strode forward, gripping her shoulders. "They're already gone. This thing is wearing their voices." "No!" the woman cried, thrashing. "They're mine!" The air darkened, the mist poured through the windows, swallowing the light. It coalesced into a single massive shape, tall, indistinct, and cold. Its edges wavered like smoke. Where its face should have been, there were only the shifting outlines of small, empty eyes. "A whispering mist," Gunnar breathed. "A remnant of the blight. It hunts grief." The entity struck first. A tendril of fog whipped across the room, snuffing out half their torches. Alucard loosed 2 arrows in rapid succession. They passed through harmlessly, but where they flew, the fog rippled, reacting to movement. "It doesn't bleed," he said. "It remembers." Brotard raised his hands, flames roaring to life around him. "Then let it remember pain." He drove both fists into the ground, sending fire spiraling outward. The mist recoiled, shrieking in many voices. The woman screamed again, clutching her bundle, now glowing green from within. Astrid drew her blade and charged into the heat, swinging through the densest part of the vapor. The steel cut through nothing, yet the mist split, writhing. She felt something cold brush her cheek, a whisper just behind her ear. We only wanted to play." Her hand faltered. For an instant the torchlight dimmed. Then Gunnar stepped forward, his eyes glowing faint violet. "Enough," he said softly. He spoke a word older than language, a banishment taught to him by voices he'd long since stopped trusting. The word cracked through the fog like thunder in a cathedral. The mist convulsed, the faces within it dissolving into streams of light that twisted upward and vanished through the roof, leaving behind silence and ash. The woman collapsed, the green glow fading from her eyes. In her arms the bundle fell limp, only rags. She wept until her voice broke. Astrid knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "They're free," she said quietly. "Not gone. Just gone from here." The woman nodded slowly, her body trembling. "The forest, it called them by name. I only wanted to hear them again." "So did it," Gunnar murmured. "The blight remembers names better than mothers do." Outside, the ring of fire guttered out, leaving smoke curling into the dawn. The forest was still, the mist retreating toward the hollow like a tide pulling back from shore. Alucard stood in the doorway, watching the fog fade. "It's weakening. Whatever heart beats below, it's losing its reach." Brotard cleaned the soot from his gauntlets, his expression unreadable. "You think mercy matters to the dead?" "No," Astrid said, sheathing her sword, "but it matters to us." As they left the ruined farmhouse, the sun finally breached the tree line, sending narrow golden shafts through the fog. For the first time in days, birds began to sing, hesitant, dissonant, but alive. Behind them, the woman sat in the doorway, clutching the cradle's remains. When the wind shifted, Astrid heard a sound, faint, gentle. Children's laughter carried far through the trees, unbroken by sorrow. She paused, head bowed, and whispered a prayer, not to gods, but to roots, to ashes, to what once was family. "Sleep," she said, "and dream soft." Then she turned to the others. The forest's wounds reach deeper than we thought. We follow the heart. Gunnar smiled faintly, lighting a pipe from the last ember of Brotard's flame. Downward, then. Always downward. Until the mountain bleeds, Brotard added. Alucard glanced once more at the horizon, the distant ridges pale under the morning light, and until it stops whispering. They left the farmhouse behind, its roof caving quietly as they vanished into the trees. Above the ruins, the mist lifted in thin threads, curling skyward like spirits unbound, fading into gold. Chapter 5. The Duergar's Gate, Expanded Edition. The entrance lay hidden where the forest thinned into black rock, a scar on the hillside where miners once carved too greedily and too deep. What remained of their effort was a gaping wound of stone framed by rusted rails and the skeletons of broken carts. The air that flowed from it was dry and hot, carrying a scent like burning coins. Astrid knelt by the opening, brushing aside a layer of soot to reveal the faint runes carved into the arch. They were dwarven, older than any Oakhaven record, each one set like a lock. The marks glowed faintly, as if some residual forge fire still lingered within them. Duergar, she said, voice low. Slave builders. This was their gate. Their shame, Gunnar corrected softly. A doorway meant to hold a god in chains. Alucard studied the ground, the cracked rails leading inward, half buried in debris. The tracks go on, he murmured, but no carts came out. Brotard stepped forward, his presence dimming the air. Then we follow where their greed went. Astrid stood, tightening the strap on her armor. Torches up, blades loose. Once we enter, there is no light but what we bring. The first corridor sloped sharply down, swallowing the torchlight as if the dark itself were hungry. The walls were smooth at first, dwarven precision, but soon turned rough, clawed and burned, as though something molten had torn its way through. Their footsteps echoed endlessly. The deeper they went, the more the air shimmered with heat. Droplets of condensation hissed into steam when they struck the stone. The smell was thick with iron and something stranger, an earthy sweetness that clung to the tongue like decay wrapped in honey. Alucard's eyes darted toward faint scratches on the wall. These aren't tool marks, he said. They're fingernails. They dug their way out, Gunnar asked. Or something dug its way in, Astrid answered. They passed an old lift shaft. Its pulleys rusted solid, the rope turned to dust. A single lantern swung from the crossbeam above, though it burned without oil. The flame inside was green. Brotard crushed it in his hand as he passed, muttering a curse. The shards hissed and dissolved like snow on his skin. The tunnel opened into a vast antechamber, a hall large enough to hold a fortress. Chains hung from the ceiling like a forest of iron vines. Some still bore hooks, others ended in rusted cages, each containing the remains of miners twisted into impossible shapes, their bones fused with metal. A broken anvil stood at the center of the hall, surrounded by a circle of runes burned deep into the floor. The markings pulsed faintly with green light, the same sick hue that haunted the Whisperwood above. Astrid approached, her torchlight glinting off scorched walls. This was a forge, she murmured, but not for steel. Gunnar crouched by the circle. For souls, he said. Duergar sorcery. They bound essence into ore, made their tools bleed with memory. Alucard ran his hand over a chain. It was warm. Something moved here recently. Duergar don't rot, Brotard said grimly. They stiffen and keep walking. As if summoned by his words, a low metallic groan reverberated through the chamber. The chains swayed, dust drifted from the ceiling like falling ash. Two shapes stepped from the far shadows, massive, armor-clad, their skin the color of burned iron. Their eyes glowed dimly red, not with life, but with something trapped. They moved in sync, dragging warhammers large enough to crush stone. The captains, Astrid whispered. Twins. They fell when the mine collapsed, and rose when the heart awoke, Gunnar finished. The Duergar captains advanced with the sound of anvils striking. Sparks spilled from their joints as they moved. When they spoke, their voices overlapped, one deep, one higher, both perfectly mirrored. The forge is not done. The flame remembers its makers. The first swing came like thunder. Astrid caught it on her shield, the impact sending her skidding backward through a rain of embers. Alucard darted left, firing an arrow that shattered against the captain's pauldron. Their armors fused to their flesh, he shouted. Brotard bellowed, charging straight into the other. His gauntlets flared with fire, meeting hammer with fist. The shockwave rippled through the room, cracking stone. He didn't yield an inch. Come then, sons of the pit, he roared. Let's see if you can still bleed. Gunnar raised both hands, his fingers tracing sigils in the air. Purple lightning leapt from his palms, arcing across the chamber to strike the nearest captain. The smell of ozone filled the air, and yet, instead of pain, the creature laughed. "Magic feeds the forge," it said. "Then choke on it," Gunnar snapped, pouring more power into the spell. The veins in his neck glowed violet, his boots sliding against the floor as energy flooded the circle. The runes flared, consuming themselves in sparks. Astrid saw the chain overhead beginning to crack. She seized a fallen pickaxe, shouting, "Alucard, cut it!" He loosed a single arrow. The chain snapped, and a rusted cage fell, crushing one captain beneath a rain of molten shards. The impact threw up a cloud of ash and glowing dust. Through it, Astrid charged, driving her sword into the creature's throat seam. Green fire erupted from the wound, licking up her blade before dying out. Brotard met the other captain head-on, his gauntlet wreathed in flame. "For the fire that forged me!" he roared, and brought his fist down in a blazing arc that shattered helm, skull, and hammer alike. The echo rolled through the chamber like a storm breaking. The last of the chains fell still. In the aftermath, silence returned, thick, trembling. The runes beneath their feet glowed faintly again, forming new lines, new shapes. The floor began to pulse. Alucard knelt, placing his palm flat against the stone. "It's hollow," he said. "Something moves below." Gunnar staggered to his feet, breathing hard. "Then we're standing on its lung." Astrid stepped back as the circle's center cracked, revealing molten light beneath. Green shot through with gold. Heat rose in waves, carrying with it a deep rhythmic sound. Thump, thump. Brotard stared into the fissure, eyes wide. "The heart," he whispered. "It's still beating." Astrid gripped her sword tighter. "Then we find the core. We end this." "End it?" Gunnar said, shaking his head. "Astrid, this thing is the mountain. You can't kill what was never alive." She met his gaze, the torchlight reflected in her eyes like molten silver. "Then we forge it new." They climbed from the chamber hours later, their bodies blackened with soot and blood. The wind that met them at the surface was cool, clean, carrying the scent of rain from the valley below. Behind them, the Duergar's gate glowed faintly, not with the green of corruption, but with a softer hue, amber and steady, like forge light in the dark. Astrid raised her hand, her voice low but firm. "Mark this place," she said. "No miner, no wanderer enters again. The mountain's wounds are its own." Brotard nodded, driving his broken hammer into the ground as a marker. Gunnar exhaled, his laughter weary but real. "Well," he said, "we lived through it, which means the next horror will be twice as angry." Alucard adjusted his quiver. "Then we'll make it quick." They turned toward the long road home, the forest whispering faintly in the distance, not in threat but in uneasy gratitude. "Thank you for remembering." The wind rose, scattering ash into the sky. Astrid looked back once, her expression unreadable. "The forge sleeps," she murmured. "But even sleep can dream of fire." And the gate, far behind her, flickered once, a final heartbeat deep in the stone, before darkness claimed it whole. Chapter 6. The Warden's Banner. The forest slept again. For the first time in months, the Whisperwood's breath did not carry the scent of rot or blood, but the clean musk of earth after rain. Its canopy glimmered with dew, as though crowned with 1,000 tiny candles. The blight had receded, leaving behind hollow roots and blackened trees that, in the pale dawn, looked like bones rising from sacred ground. The battle beneath the mountain was over, but for Oakhaven, and for those who carried the scars of the deep roads, peace was not a luxury. It was work. 2 villages stood in the shadow of the mountain. Oakhaven, stronghold of the forge, and Greycliff, the mining town half devoured by the blight. In the wake of victory, Astrid decreed they would not rebuild apart, but together, their walls broken and rejoined like the halves of a reforged blade. At first it was chaos. Oakhaven's smiths distrusted the soot-stained miners. Greycliff's survivors called the wardens iron tyrants. But Astrid worked among them herself, not from a throne but from the forge. She raised hammer and tongs beside her apprentices, her arms blackened with soot, her voice hoarse from command. Under her eye, a new city rose where the 2 villages met. Stone foundations, timber roofs, the veins of both mountain and forest woven together. Walls carved with runes of warding stood where the blight had once seeped. Every gate bore a seal of silver hammered into shape by Astrid's own hand, a badger encircled by flame, the mark of the Warden Eternal. They called the new city Warden's Rest. "No city should sleep easy," Astrid said at the dedication, "but this one may at least dream in peace." When word of the city's rising spread, the forest stirred again, not in rage but in curiosity. Wolves began to appear at the tree line, their eyes bright and intelligent. their steps soundless. And one night, under a moon the color of pale bone, Lilith came. She walked upright from the woods, a woman in silhouette, yet every motion marked by something feral beneath the skin. Her cloak shimmered like fur, her eyes silvered by moonlight. At her back followed her pack, half beasts, half souls who had chosen her over the darkness. The guards raised their weapons, but Astrid lifted her hand. "Hold! We were not the only ones who fought the blight." Lilith stopped before the gate. For a moment, neither spoke, only the wind whispered between them, carrying the scent of pine and ash. "You've built your fires close to the trees," Lilith said at last. "Do you think the roots will forgive you for burning them?" "The roots don't forgive," Astrid answered. "They endure? So do we." A small smile touched the wolf-woman's lips. "Endurance I respect. Dominion I do not." "Then let us make neither," Astrid said. "Let us make balance." Lilith's silver gaze flickered toward the forge light spilling from the city walls. "And what would you offer, Warden of Stone?" "Sanctuary for your kin when winter starves the woods. Freedom to hunt where the trees are still wild. In return, peace. No blood between us, no shadows without name." Lilith tilted her head, listening to something distant, then she nodded once, slow and deliberate. "The forest remembers your promise. So will I." She extended her hand. Astrid took it, iron fingers meeting claws beneath the moon. Thus was forged the pact of fang and flame, sealed not by parchment, but by respect. In the weeks that followed, the city took shape as though memory itself helped lay the stones. Brotard founded a small chapel at the edge of the forge district. No idols, no sermons, just a single brazier that never went out. He named it the Ember Shrine, where the weary came to leave their burdens in the fire. His prayers were few, and his counsel blunt, but his door stayed open through every storm. Gunnar reopened the old merchant hall as a library. Its shelves held as many curses as books, but no one minded. He spent his nights chronicling the Blight War in ink that shimmered faintly violet, often muttering to himself when the quills whispered back. The children adored him. He taught them how to listen to the silence between words. Alucard disappeared into the forest's northern reaches, building a watchtower atop the highest ridge, a silent sentinel where the mountain met the trees. Sometimes at dusk, a single arrow would whistle through the air toward the city, striking a post near Astrid's forge. No note, no message, just a reminder, "I am here," and Astrid herself rarely left the heart of Warden's Rest. Her forge became both temple and council hall. The new banners, black cloth trimmed in gold bearing the silver badger, hung from its rafters. When she worked, she often spoke to the hammer as if it were an old friend. The sound of her anvil became the city's pulse, echoing even through sleep. The day the city's walls were completed, Astrid called for a gathering. From the forge balconies and market alleys, from miners' tunnels and hunters' dens, the people came, thousands, lit by the glow of torches that reflected off the rain-wet stones. Above them, on the half-built gatehouse, Astrid stood with Brotard, Gunnar, and Alucard's banner in hand. The crowd fell silent as she lifted the cloth. It was black and gold, stitched with symbols of both Oakhaven and Greycliff, the badger for the forge, the pickaxe for the mines, and encircling both, a silver crescent representing the forest and Lilith's pack. "This city stands," Astrid said, her voice carrying through the square, "not on walls or wealth, but on will. We have seen the mountain bleed, and we did not flee. We have heard the forest whisper, and we did not silence it. We endured, and in our endurance, we became something new." She paused, letting the torchlight flicker across her steel-gray eyes. "So let this banner hang as a vow. No darkness will ever find us divided again." She drove the pole into the gate's highest stone, the cloth unfurled, catching the mountain wind. The torches below flared brighter, as if the flames themselves bowed in answer. The people cheered. Even the wolves beyond the tree line howled, not in anger but in chorus. That night, Warden's Rest celebrated. Fires burned in the squares, laughter echoed through the streets, and the forge sang until the moon dipped below the ridges. Yet as the last revelers drifted home, the city grew still, too still. Astrid stood alone on the western wall, watching the tree line shiver in the faint dawn. The forest glowed faintly with dew and mist, peaceful. But beneath her boots, she felt it. A tremor, subtle, measured, like breath. Thump, thump. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythm settle against her ribs. It wasn't the same hateful pulse she'd felt beneath the mountain. Not corruption, but memory. The mountain dreaming, perhaps. Or something buried too deep to die. "Rest if you can," she whispered to the dark. "We will keep watch." Below her, the city's fires flickered, reflecting in the forge's windows like a constellation of mortal stars. Brotard's brazier glowed steady. Gunnar's hall spilled soft light from its doors. And far on the horizon, the faintest gleam of an arrowhead caught the dawn before fading into mist. Above them, the banner of the Warden snapped in the wind, black and gold, silver and ash, the mark of unity hammered from ruin. And deep below, unseen, the heart of the mountain pulsed once more, not in anger, but in remembrance. Thump, thump, the earth does not forget those who wake it. Epilogue, the City of Two Flames. Warden's Rest was not born clean. It rose from ash and mud, from broken axes and weeping earth. The new city smelled of soot and sap, of molten metal cooling in the rain. Yet, amid the ruin, two fires burned, one in the forges of the mountain, the other in the hearts of those who refused to let the dark be their legacy. The people called it the City of Two Flames. One forged, one found. The first year after the Blight War was neither peace nor war. It was rebuilding, the slow, stubborn kind where every hammer stroke echoed like a prayer, and every plank laid was a promise that the forest would never claim them again. Astrid's forge had grown into the beating heart of Warden's Rest. The building stood where Oakhaven's walls met Greycliff's mines, half stone, half timber, crowned with glass panels that caught both moonlight and flame. Inside, rows of anvils glowed red gold like small suns. The air always tasted of iron and ash, the smell of creation and exhaustion braided together, and she worked beside her smiths, not above them. Each morning she would tie back her braid, lift her hammer, and forge until the light dimmed. Armor for the guards, hinges for the gates, toys for the children who had never known war. Above her forge hung a new banner, black cloth edged in gold, the badger of Oakhaven encircled by the silver crescent of Lilith's pact. When the wind caught it, the symbol rippled like flame. She still kept her armor on a stand near the furnace. Its surface was dulled by soot, its edges nicked from battles long won, not as relic, but reminder. Every week, she'd polish it in silence, whispering the same words. Steel forgets if you let it. Her nights were spent walking the ramparts, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where forest met moonlight. The world below slept. She never did. The city had named her Warden Eternal, and she had accepted the title like a wound she chose to keep open. Beyond the northern ridge stood the Vale's Eye, a stone tower wrapped in ivy and fog. Alucard built it himself from salvaged ruin, stone by stone, without word or witness. From its crown, one could see both the city's torches and the first line of the Whisperwood's canopy, silvered by dew. He was rarely seen, but often felt. Hunters swore that the forest grew quieter when he walked it, and the wolves of Lilith's pack bowed their heads when his shadow passed. He trained rangers and scouts in the tower's courtyard, teaching them not to kill what they could learn from, and not to fear what they could not yet understand. His lessons were brief, his judgments harsher. He spoke little, but his silence carried the weight of scripture. On nights when the moon rose full, Astrid sometimes found a single arrow driven into the city gate, its shaft wrapped in a strip of cloth. She never unwrapped them. She didn't need to. The message was always the same: I still keep watch. At the southern quarter of Warden's Rest, where the mountain runoff carved through the earth, Brotard raised his ember chapel. It was small, built from salvaged brick and a roof of blackened copper, but the brazier at its center burned without pause. No idols stood within, only flame and silence. Those who came did not kneel. They sat, listening to the crackle of fire and the low hum of the priest's voice. Pain, Brotard would tell them, is the forge that shapes mercy. Fire devours only what refuses to change. He took in miners who had turned to drink, soldiers haunted by the screams beneath the mountain, widows who could not stop hearing the forest whisper their names. For each, he had the same cure: work. They rebuilt, repaired, dug and fed, each act a prayer, each callous a confession. By winter, the Ember Chapel had become a sanctuary for the lost, not a church but a hearth, and when storms swept the valley, the light from its chimney never went out. At night, when the city slept, Brotard knelt before the brazier alone. His armor, now blackened and pitted, hung behind him like a shadow. He whispered his prayers into the flame. If I must burn forever, let it be for warmth. Gunnar claimed the old merchant hall of Greycliff, a place once reeking of greed and dust, and turned it into something stranger, the Hall of Echoes. Books and scrolls lined every beam, shelves sagged under the weight of relics, cracked mirrors, vials of blight ash, fragments of runes no one dared speak aloud. The air inside smelled of ink and candle smoke, and sometimes faintly up at ozone. He wrote constantly, his quill scratching through the nights like the ticking of some old clock. He recorded everything: the battles, the bargains, the whispered regrets of those who'd survived. Children gathered at his door to hear his stories, not tales of glory but of choices, mistakes, and second chances. He told them about a forest that could think, a mountain that could dream, and a city that learned to listen. He told them that even darkness, when remembered honestly, could become light. Astrid visited often. They argued quietly over philosophy and memory. "You make our ghosts too noble," she would say. "Someone has to," he'd reply, "else we forget why we stopped fighting." Sometimes when the candles guttered low, he would hear a faint whisper in the rafters, not the cruel voices of the blight, but gentler ones, repeating his words as though approving. Lilith's pack kept their distance, but their eyes watched the city from the hills. When snow fell thick and food grew scarce, her wolves would approach the outer gates in silence, and Astrid's guards would leave cuts of meat, smoked fish, and salted bread at the tree line. None spoke of it. None needed to. The pact of fang and flame held. Sometimes Lilith herself appeared, always at night, always alone, to speak with Astrid atop the wall. Their conversations were quiet, carried on the wind between the clink of chain and the cry of owls. "Your people grow loud," Lilith would say. "The forest grows restless." "Then we will learn to sing softly," Astrid would answer. "And when they forget, you'll remind them." The wolf woman's smile was all teeth. "I will." Years passed, though the scars of the blight never truly healed. Roots still grew strangely near the riverbanks, and at night the mountains hummed faintly, as if remembering old pain. Yet life went on, markets reopened, bells rang, smiths laughed over drink and fire, the city's children played in streets lined with glowing lanterns shaped like leaves, never knowing how close the world had come to ending. At the heart of it all, beneath the forge and the mines, the mountains still pulsed, a slow, steady rhythm that sometimes made the stones vibrate underfoot. The scholars called it the slumbering core. Gunnar called it hope that dreams. Astrid never called it anything at all, but some nights, standing on the balcony above her forge, she would tap her palm against her chest, once, twice, and feel it answering her. Thump, thump, alive, but quiet. On the 5th anniversary of the Blight's fall, the four met again, for the first time since the mountain had sealed behind them. They gathered on the city's highest wall. Below, torches wove golden paths through the streets. Above, the aurora shimmered faintly, green and gold like veins of ore in the sky. Astrid leaned on her hammer. "We did what we said we would." "Aye," Alucard said softly, "but the forest still watches." "Let it," Gunnar said, lighting his pipe. "Even gods get lonely." Brotard folded his arms. "We should pray. The dead deserve their mention." "We'll drink instead," Gunnar replied. "The living deserve that." They laughed, weary laughter, full of years, empty of regret. The sound carried down into the city, mingling with the forge's song and the wolves' distant howls. Astrid looked out over Warden's Rest, her city of stone and flame, and whispered, "No darkness falls where many lights burn together." The wind caught her words, carrying them down the mountain, through the streets, across the sleeping forest. Far below, deep under roots and rivers, something vast shifted, not in anger, but in acknowledgement. The mountain exhaled, and for an instant all the city's flames leaned toward the woods as if bowing. Then came the faintest echo, not a whisper, but a memory of one. "We remember. We endure." And as dawn touched the peaks of the valley, two flames burned side by side, one of iron, one of wild heart, casting their light together upon a world that at last had learned to live with its ghosts.